discretion is advised.
This little light of mine, you know that I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, you know that I'm gonna let it shine all the time. Let it shine, oh yeah.
Schizophrenia is a serious mental disorder in which people interpret reality abnormally. Schizophrenia may result in some combination of hallucinations, delusions, and extremely disordered thinking and behaviors. To someone with schizophrenia, these hallucinations and delusions are as real as it would be if someone came into the room and started talking to you. Is heaven and hell real? To some yes and to some no. But on May 20, 2015, the battle between heaven and hell was very real to Romechia Simms. James Donald Lee met Romechia Simms in 2008 at a basketball game, where he was working as a security guard, and he was instantly attracted to her. I gave her the eye and she walked past and stopped to talk. The rest is history, he said. When Lee and Simms learned they were having a son in 2011, the timing was not ideal. She was living in southern Maryland with her mother, and he had a roommate, but they tried to make things work. Their son, Ji Aire Lee, was born August 22, 2011. James Lee said he picked the name of Ji Aire and cut the umbilical cord. Romechia had a natural childbirth. James Lee said it was amazing to see the birth of his son. In 2013, Romechia and Ji Aire finally moved into his two-bedroom apartment. But things were not meant to be, and the couple began drifting apart in late 2014. Around the same time, Romechia was fired from her job at a candy shop in Chinatown. This triggered something in Romechia, and she began to have serious mental health issues. She had her first experience of visions and beliefs that people were knocking on her door with guns. In February 2015, her symptoms worsened, and she began to believe that people were trying to kill her. A few days later, she called Lee while he was at work, and she sounded incoherent. She told him that someone tried to kill him when he got home from work the other day, and that someone had been hiding out in the bushes and shot at him, but the gun was jammed. Lee was at a complete loss and had no clue what Romechia was talking about. Romechia then called her mom to pick her up. Her mother, Vantasha, left immediately to pick her and her grandson up at the apartment. Romechia, who once attended Bowie State University in hopes of becoming a teacher, was very upset when her mother arrived. She wasn't herself. She was wild-eyed and looked right through her mother. She was in total fear that someone was trying to harm her. Romechia Simms was brought to the Southern Maryland Hospital Center and evaluated. At SMHC, Romechia espoused beliefs that she and her family members had been raped under hypnosis, and that both she and her son had been shot. She was diagnosed with schizophrenia and given medication. But not long after this, she split up with James and moved in with her mother. Romechia, Ji Aire, and her mom all lived together in a tiny hotel room, which was not a good thing. Residents and housekeepers of the Deluxe Inn Motel in La Plata heard constant fighting between grandmother and mother, and noticed that Ji Aire seemed to be mistreated at times. Court records in Charles County show a history of domestic disputes between Romechia and her mother, Vantasha. In 2011 and 2012, Romechia Simms was charged with second-degree assault following altercations with her mother, including one in which an officer said that Romechia Simms pulled a dreadlock from her mother's head. In both cases, she was found not guilty. In the 2011 case, Romechia wrote a letter to the court explaining the stress she was under. "Between being a mom, work, and school, I have a load on my hands," she wrote. She told court officers she was working as a barista in Starbucks and attending classes at Bowie State University to become a teacher. In 2013, Vantasha Simms sought a peace order requiring her daughter to stay away from her. In those papers, Vantasha also considered seeking custody of Ji Aire, but scratched out the paperwork that would formalize the request. Also in those papers, Vantasha wrote that her daughter attacked me before jumping on me and hitting me while I was sitting on my bed. She was very angry and out of control. In the last week of February, Vantasha called Lee in the middle of an argument she was having with Romechia. She said Romechia was trying to leave with Ji Aire and take a cab to Lee's apartment in Washington. Hearing that made Lee very nervous. He didn't feel safe with Romechia taking him anywhere in her state of mind, but he agreed. Romechia got a cab. But in the middle of the ride, she jumped out of the moving car with her son. Lee waited and waited, and they never showed up, so he went looking for them. He eventually found her and Ji Aire walking on the side of Branch Avenue in southern Maryland well past midnight around 2 a.m. Ji Aire was walking with no socks, with his jacket open and in his pajamas. Romechia had dropped the diaper bag 2 blocks away. He asked her, "What are you doing?" Romechia gave him a look like she didn't know who he was. That night, Lee took Romechia back to the hospital, where she stayed for a week. 2 weeks later, on March 16, 2015, Lee filed an expedited motion for custody in D.C. Superior Court. He wrote that he hadn't seen his son in almost a month and that Simms hadn't taken his calls or replied to his text messages. Simms filed a response in April, arguing that Lee hardly spent time with the boy and gave her only $40 to $60 at a time to support him. She said that with Lee working until 11 p.m., he couldn't look after their son. Ji Aire staying with his mother would be in his best interest for him because I will always ensure that he is put first and properly cared for, she wrote. A custody hearing was set for May 11th. In the meantime, Romechia met with her psychiatrist and participated in an intake assessment at Regenerations Counseling Services where she complained of stress but was unable to identify the cause behind her stress. She was described as guarded, paranoid, depressed, and irritable, and stated a belief that people, including her boyfriend, were trying to kill her. At the court hearing May 11th, she and Lee agreed to share legal custody. She'd get primary physical control, and he'd have Ji Aire on the weekends and any other day he wasn't working. Lee agreed to the arrangement only because he felt that D.C. Superior Court Judge Peter A. Crothamer wouldn't acknowledge his concerns about Romechia's behavior and mental state if he said anything. So he kept everything to himself. The judge asked if there was any reason the two couldn't co-parent. Is someone unfit here? James Lee said, "There's no one unfit here, Your Honor." This hearing would be the last time he would see his son alive. On May 18, 2015, Romechia Simms stopped taking her schizophrenia medication because she believed the pills weren't working. This caused her to have a hard time sleeping at night. The voices in her head were back and were getting louder and louder. Early in the morning of May 20th, she called Lee. He wasn't home but left a message saying she was upset and that she and her mother were having some issues and that he needed to come and get them right away. Ji Aire had woken up with a cough that morning, so to get away from her mother, Romechia went to the dollar store and got some Vicks Vapor Rub for him. Then they headed to Burger King. After something to eat, they were off to the park. But it wasn't her idea to take her son to the park. It was her voices. 3-year-old Ji Aire Lee was put in a swing at Wills Memorial Park in La Plata, Maryland at about 11:15 a.m. Once there, the voices told her that there was a battle in the park between heaven and hell. She tried to get Ji Aire out of the swing but couldn't. The voices told her that he would be safer in the swing and that someone would come to help. It was cold for late May. It was chilly and drizzled all day. The temperature ranged between 50 to 58 degrees. The hours went by and it was now 12:30 a.m. Fontasha grew very worried and called her daughter. Romechia answered the phone. She said, "Where are you, Ro?" She said, "We're fine. We're on our way back." Fontasha said, "Okay." But things weren't fine. Romechia Simms was still pushing 3-year-old Ji Aire in the swing while she watched a battle between heaven and hell in fear all around her. Early in the morning on May 22nd, a nearby resident noticed the same woman pushing a child from the night before and knew something wasn't right and called the authorities. By the time the sheriff's officers and La Plata police arrived at the park at 6:55 a.m., Romechia had been pushing Ji Aire for 44 hours straight in a swing through rain and freezing temperatures. They asked Romechia if she was okay. Romechia just looked straight through the officers, looking out at the park with a faraway look in her eyes. They checked Ji Aire, who was slumped over in the swing, but it was instantaneously clear that he was dead. They noticed his jacket in the trash and his shoes were off his feet, filled with rainwater on the ground. Rigor mortis had set in, and in order to get him out, they had to take the whole swing down and cut him out. Romechia was readmitted to SMHC. The reason for admission was listed as psychosis.
Here's Johnny.
Romechia was described as tearful and confused when she was brought in. She was immediately put back on her medication for schizophrenia. Ji Aire's funeral was held on June 5, 2015 at the First Baptist Church of Highland Park in Landover, Maryland. Ji Aire Lee was laid out in a white casket surrounded by white roses. The mourners sang "This Little Light of Mine" for Ji Aire during the service. As pallbearers carried the casket to the burial site at Resurrection Cemetery in Clinton, Maryland, Romechia Simms and James Lee walked hand in hand as they followed the procession. On September 11, 2015, Romechia Simms was charged with child abuse resulting in death, involuntary manslaughter, and child neglect. State's Attorney Anthony Covington said that the delay in obtaining an indictment was to ensure he had gathered all the information he could, even though the medical examiner had ruled the death a homicide back in June. During the proceeding, prosecutors declared her a danger and a flight risk. Prosecutors said Simms' mental state is in question and they wanted her to remain jailed. A judge ordered Simms held with bond set at $150,000 and scheduled a January trial. Romechia Simms was facing up to 45 years in prison, 30 years on first-degree child abuse, 10 years on the manslaughter charge, and 5 years on the charge of child neglect. While in custody, Romechia participated in a pre-trial evaluation where she was found competent to stand trial. But the trial would never happen. In February 2016, Romechia entered an Alford plea to the charge of involuntary manslaughter. By entering that plea, she acknowledged that prosecutors had enough evidence to convict her of the charge, but she did not have to admit guilt. In his statement before sentencing, the prosecutor said he believes Vantasha, Romechia's mother, is partly to blame for the death of her grandson. He said that based on Romechia's fragility, her family did not take the necessary precautions to monitor her when she was with her son. He also questioned why local services did not adequately follow up with Romechia after she was hospitalized a month prior to the incident for her schizophrenia. He also wanted to know why Ji Aire's father, James Lee, never raised concerns about his former girlfriend's mental stability, but instead told the judge at the custody hearing that Simms was not an unfit parent and offered to share custody. "I don't want anybody to think that the state or this community is happy with this outcome," said the prosecutor. "We have a defendant, Miss Simms, who knew she had a mental illness and did not take care of that mental illness." Despite 3 psychologists who found Romechia not criminally responsible, the prosecutor was very vocal that the infant did not have to die over his mother's negligence. As a direct result of her not taking her medicine 2 days leading up to the episode, Ji Aire is dead, he said to Judge Hayward West. "Essentially, I can't think of any other word to use for it, Your Honor. Ji Aire was slowly tortured to death." After reviewing the reports from experts from both the state and the defense, the Circuit Court for Charles County found that at the time of the criminal act, Ms. Simms had a mental disorder that caused her to lack the capacity to appreciate the criminality of her act and to conform actions in accordance with the law. Subsequently, the Circuit Court found Ms. Simms, NCR, are not criminally responsible for the involuntary manslaughter of her son, and determined that she would not be a danger to herself or the person or property of others, and set her free under a 5-year conditional release order, stating that she must see a psychiatrist and take her medication. Within a year of her sentence, Romechia Simms began to violate her conditions of release. A hospital warrant was issued and she was re-hospitalized. She fought her confinement in court and won and was released after 6 months. But to this day, Romechia Simms continues to be a no-call and no-show at her therapy appointments, and has tried to have her conditions of release changed through the courts.
Come by here, Lord, come by here. Come by here, Lord, come by here. Come by here, Lord, come by here. Oh, Lord, come by here. Somebody needs you, Lord, come by here. Somebody needs you, Lord, come by here. Somebody needs you, Lord, come by here. Oh, Lord, come by here.
Welcome to my channel. This is Mr. Scary. Hope you enjoy the show.